Oh, you're on a hard line. Okay, good.
Got a bit of static tonight.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. I hope it doesn't get us. All right. What are you doing in Las Vegas, by the way?
Right now I'm repairing computers and restoring old cars.
Uh-huh. Old cars, your love.
It's what I enjoy the most, but I have what's called fibromyalgia, so there are times when I just can't do the work.
I understand. All right, George. Maybe we'll investigate the possibility of another line or another telephone. It was good. I wonder what happened.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's odd. There's no other phone line open, is there?
No, not in this house.
All right, let me try this and reset this and see if that helps. All right, anyway, George, it's hard to even know where to start, except all my life, I saw the movie, and all my life I've been hearing about Amityville, and in fact, a man that I interviewed, who's now passed away, of course, Father Malachi Martin, said to me in the course of an interview that the Amityville house was one of the most haunted places in all of America.
A live interview you did with him?
It certainly was. Yes.
So I assume hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people heard this.
Oh, absolutely, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Of course. So I'm not sure where to begin all of this with you, except I guess, in the bio there it said that you and Kathy had just married and you were looking for a brand new house to live in, and it's the nesting thing. You get married, you get a family, and you want to go and you want to find a place, have that family, and then that's what you were doing.
Well, we both had homes. We each had our own home.
Oh.
So the idea was to sell both homes and get one. That way we could look at it as both of ours.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Something new and something that belonged to both of you.
I'm not sure Kathy liked my house or I liked hers either.
Oh.
So it was one of those, let's go find something we both like.
Yep, makes sense.
And she had 3 children. And so it really made sense to put them both up on the market, and then whichever one sold first move into the other one, and then as soon as that was sold, hopefully we would have found another house by then, and it did work out that way.
Yeah. Do you remember how old the children were at the time? Roughly?
I believe Missy was not in kindergarten yet, so she would have been like 4. And then Chris and Danny would have been 7 and 9, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm sorry, it's too long since I tried to remember those things.
Yeah, well, no. Well, you're going to be trying to remember a lot. It's been now a long time ago.
Hopefully I'll do better.
So, and by the way, folks, George has a cold, too. We both have a cold, so bear with both of us. It's tough to think clearly. It's tough to do anything when you're in the middle of one of these monsters. How we've gone to the moon, done all this other stuff, now even cloned the first human, according to the aliens, and we still can't cure the common cold George Government says to me.
It's pretty amazing.
Yep. All right, so you went to look at the house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville. All of you, I presume, or just you and Kathy?
No, all of us.
All, even the children, huh?
Yeah. And we had a criteria that was we were trying to find a home on the water, because I had a boat then that wasn't trailerable, really. And it was important to have the boat close by rather than travel back and forth to it, since we tried to use it as much as we could.
Okay, well, you knew, I presume you knew, about the DeVeo massacre, that 6 people had been murdered in that house. I mean, that's a very serious thing to have occurred.
We didn't know this when we first went to see the house. We knew it after the realtor told us after we toured the house.
It was a pretty good price, right?
The market, it had been on the market for, I believe, 100,000 or so, and by then it had been reduced, if I remember correctly, to 90. We made an offer of 80, and they accepted it.
Really? What do you think, George? What do you think market value was for that house then? Real market value?
Well, the house was 4,000 feet. It had a boathouse that would take easily a 36-foot boat at the time. It had a 2-car garage attached to that, and heated pool, a full basement. My guess would be then realistically 125,000 would have been not unheard of.
Right. So at some point you must have asked yourself or the realtor, hey, how come maybe after you consummated the deal, how come it's so cheap? Or when did you find out 6 people have been murdered there?
After she showed it to us, and it was obvious that Kathy had fallen in love with it, and I liked it very much. She said, I don't know if I should have told you this before I showed it to you or after, but this is the house the DeFeos were murdered in. And we kind of looked at her like, what do you mean? And then she reminded us of the news stories that had been a year earlier and the trial that was just, I guess, in the process of starting what was going on.
All right, for those who don't remember, can you tell us about the DeFeo murders? I mean, this DeFeo fellow said that, I think at the time, he claimed that he heard voices telling him to kill his family, right?
Well, DeFeo was eventually convicted, yes, of killing his mom, dad, two brothers, and two sisters.
And for that, he
while they were asleep, and while they were asleep,
went around with a shotgun and dispatched them, I think.
It was a Marlin 36 caliber rifle.
Yeah, okay, and he's now serving, I think, 6
consecutive life terms, supposedly with no possibility for parole, but a hearing comes up every year or so.
I imagine the house had been cleaned up. There was no sign of the massacre that occurred there.
Oh, no, nothing like that. The house showed like any house would.
And George, you're looking at it, you're looking at the water thinking, oh my God, yes, right?
Oh, yeah, we weren't looking for an $80,000 or $90,000 or $100,000 house, but we were certainly in the $60,000 to $70,000 range when we considered we had 2 homes that sold for over $40,000 each. And just the fees on keeping our boat in a marina back then really made the difference very well as far as money went. And I had a successful business with it, but my grandfather's and my father's, so it wasn't something that, I'll put it this way, we went to one bank, got qualified there, and got the mortgage right away. Didn't have to go around and shop for a mortgage or apply anywhere.
That's interesting.
We walked in with a little over $20,000 down, so we ended up with a $60,000 mortgage.
Did the family, you must have sat down with the family, family conference at some point, look, this horrible thing happened here. Can you handle that fact? Do you love the house? Do you still want to move in?
Oh, sure. We asked the kids, Art, if if this was going to bother them, because if it was going to be an issue with them, then we would have certainly walked on considering the house. They were all fine with it.
Was there anything at that point? I mean, none of the children, nor Kathy, nor anybody said, look, what if it's haunted or anything like that? That never really even entered your psyche, or did you even consider that?
Not considered in that way, no.
No.
It was, look, you're going to have the same bedrooms that the kids had when they were killed here. Is that going to be a problem? That kind of thing. We asked them, when we talked about it at length as a family. It wasn't a snap decision by any means. We went back and saw the house a number of times. One time, Kathy and I even went down in my boat to see it from the water, see if we could find it. South Shore isn't always the easiest thing to get up into the little rivers and whatever and find a house along there.
Did you and Kathy have enough from the sale of your other houses to afford the $20,000, the down payment?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay. Are you a religious person, George?
That means something different to everybody. Back then, I think absolutely not. I believed in the Lord's Prayer, that kind of thing. I was a non-practicing Methodist. But today, what I believe is my own personal beliefs, and there are some things that I believe are pretty unshakable and have proven to be so over the last 25 years.
And Kathy?
Very. I would consider Kathy very religious. Kathy has a ministry that feeds thousands of people in Phoenix every year, homeless people.
Then you met this, you're going to have to help me with his name. Father Ralph, is it?
Father Ralph Pecoraro.
Okay. When did you come in contact with him and under what circumstances?
He was an ecclesiastical judge. He sat in the diocesan office for the Catholic Church at Rockville Center as a judge, ruling on various cases that came subject to church law for the Catholic Church. My first wife that she had applied for an annulment, meant that I had the opportunity to go in and be interviewed, if I wished, about that annulment process. And I didn't understand it at the time, and so I went down and met with him. He called me and invited me in to do that. I really think it was a necessary thing. I really didn't care whether she got an annulment or not. I wasn't really sure that an annulment was proper, but and the result is that's how I met him.
Okay. What kind of man was he?
Extraordinary.
In what sense?
He read and spoke 9 languages, had an equivalent degree from a law degree from Oxford. He met you on your terms. You didn't have to go to him. He was friendly and smart, and he took his time to explain things to me, why it was important that this annulment be granted, and what the conditions the church considered it to be properly. So, but more than that, I didn't realize at the time that there was something unusual about him in the sense that he's an ecclesiastical judge. I just figured that was his job. I realized the kind of degrees he had, or the intellect involved in doing such a job, or how you get to do that.
So I guess you all became fast friends through this process.
Friends, and talked on the phone maybe once every 10 days, 7 days, sometimes 2 weeks, but it was always going to be, he was going to come to dinner, meet Kathy and the kids, that kind of thing.
All right, he ended up, anyway, you became friends, and
yes.
He ended up blessing this house, right?
Yeah, and I should tell you how that came about.
I'd like to know how it came about, yes.
One of my hobbies was building Harleys then, and a friend of mine, Jimmy Muscalzo in New York, had a Harley shop in East Northport, New York, and Jimmy, when I told him what house we're buying, the Bayo house, right, he said, "You've got to get the house blessed." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You've got to get a priest to get the house blessed." And I went home from that and asked Kathy about that, and she said, "Oh yeah, that's something you do. If you're Catholic and you buy a new house, you do that."
And especially in this case.
And we didn't know any priests.
No.
So Kathy was a non-practicing Catholic at the time, and so I called Father Ray and asked him if he would do it, and he said, "Yeah, sure, I'd be glad to." Little did I realize that wasn't the kind of thing that
This was after you moved in, George?
No, this is before we actually closed on the house.
Okay,
so it's one of those things you do supposedly as soon as you can when you buy it.
All right,
so it was coordinated that he would come in the day that we actually had the closing that afternoon.
Gotcha.
So we were moving in when he showed up to do that.
And so, boom, here he comes and begins what? Moving through the house to bless it. I don't know how that's done.
Well, I hadn't actually even seen him arrive, and I hadn't seen him since I had seen him in his office. That I recall now when I think back about it. It was the first time I'd seen him in months. I talked to him quite a bit, but always on the phone. So there he is going into the house, and I waved. I was in the back of the truck unloading a U-Haul, and a number of our friends, even one of Jimmy's brothers was there helping unload the stuff and moving it into the house. Sure, big day. We were a little bit behind because after we closed on the finances in New York, you do real estate a different way than you do out here. You go to a closing and they have their attorney, and the bank has an attorney or a representative, and you have your own attorney, and they all sit there and they write everything up right then and there.
Sure.
And the title company has someone. It's a different process than it is anywhere else that I've seen. Well, we forgot to get the key at the closing, so we had to go back and find the realtor and go back and get the key so we could actually get in the house. Right? All these people waiting around to help us move in. So he showed up, and we were quite behind time. It's starting to get dark. It's November. And so I waved down, and he went on in, found Kathy, and went about blessing the house.
Which means what? You go from room to room, that kind of thing?
Yeah, he went room to room, said prayers in each room, using holy water, and I guess there's a house blessing that they do, and I'm not privy to the words.
Nor am I, but very interesting. All right, stand by, George. We're already at the bottom of the first hour. Goes very quickly. George Lutz is my guest. He's the man, along with his family, who lived the real Amityville horror. George, okay, so I guess we'll call him Father Ray.
Yeah.
Blessed the house, went room to room, blessed the house, and then came back and told you what?
He was a bit uncomfortable in the upstairs back bedroom. wanted to pay him for coming. He wouldn't accept payment. Tried to give him a bottle of Canadian Club. He wouldn't take that. We invited him back for dinner. He stopped and just said, he asked us what we were going to use one bedroom for, which was on the second floor on the back. And that was evidently the bedroom where the two boys had been murdered.
So he told you not to use the second floor. So I've got a little echo. Let me try to get rid of that. He told you not to use the second floor sewing room at all, or as a bedroom, or what?
He kind of explained she was going to use it as a sewing room, and that he said was fine. There was something about the room that made him uncomfortable, and he managed to communicate that to us without any alarm or anything. I really don't know how to explain this other than he asked what we were going to use the room for. He said he felt a little bit uncomfortable there, and that's basically what he said.
And so you didn't really probe and want to know the exact whys and wherefores of the warning.
No, he wasn't forthcoming with it. He was like he wanted to leave, and we weren't going to use it as a bedroom, so it wasn't an issue.
All right.
It was a strange thing for him to say, but it was like, okay, you have to leave, and that's all you're going to tell us. Obviously, thanks for coming.
Good night, and see you later.
Really, we invited him back another time, to come back for dinner, and he said he would, and that was it.
All right. I've got somebody else here who had impressions of the house, who's on the line I'd like to bring on. Mary Pescarella was the lead psychic who investigated the house along with Anne and Lorraine Warren. I've interviewed them in March of '76. Mary is a professional psychic and time walker who picked up on some truly terrifying things when she visited your home. She said the case had a profound effect on her. It was the first time she had ever encountered something she could only describe as pure evil. Pure evil.
Art, I don't know that she's ever been interviewed about this.
Well, she is going to be now. Mary, welcome to the program.
Well, good evening, Lee, and how are you?
Hi, Mary.
Hey, honey.
How are you?
Where are you, Mary?
I'm in Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania. So you've never been interviewed in this fashion before about what happened?
No, we had a strange arrangement with that. I'm very private about things that I do, and it was just something that I wasn't comfortable doing.
You are private because I'm pretty familiar in this field, Mary, and I'm not familiar with you. So you all obviously are very private. Anyway, you went into the house at the behest of Ed and Lorraine Warren. I've interviewed them. And what happened? In your own words, what happened?
We went in at a time when the North Carolina team was out there for Duke. And I had not met Lee. When I go any place, I always say, don't tell me anything about the house. And Ed called me one night and said, I have a case I'd like you to investigate. And what is your impression? I said, I see a white house with a thin window. And he said, okay, don't say anything else.
Right.
And just we'll get in the car and go. And when we arrived there, there was a team there and we could not go in. And they went up and got pizza and I stayed in the car. Then I walked out to the back of the house because I like to get viewings of things.
Yes.
And when I got into the back, I had heard water. And so I saw a pool. I thought, well, that's it. There's the pool, there's the water, and discharge that. But while I was in back there, I usually say, I'm Catholic, and I usually say some prayers before I go into a house. It was my quiet time, and I looked up into the window in the back of the house, and I saw the face of a young girl looking back out.
A young girl.
Right, and I knew nothing of it to say. I hadn't met Lee. I'm sorry, George.
Either one works, Mary.
Well, you're leading me. So I had not met him. But because children were involved, and I'm a proverbial mother, I was only interested in doing the house because there were children involved in the house.
Of course.
So I looked up and I saw the face in the window. It later became, it was the sewing room, I believe, that was the upstairs window looking out.
That would be the one Father Ray talked about.
Right. And at that time, we hadn't been in the house. When you enter this house, it's very deceptive. when I first went into the house, I said to Ed, these people are really weird. We're not even going to think about this. How beautiful. And the house was beautiful. The Lutzes had decorated the house. So you walked in and it was a beautiful home. It gave you no feeling, no sensation of anything other than a house. That comes much later.
All right, but at some point.
When I went upstairs to, the first thing that we did when we went in is there's a dining room to the right-hand side, and that had a table that had dishes and things. Later we cleared some of that. When you go, there's a stairwell as you enter, and then when you go down, there's another stairwell that goes down to a basement area. When you get into the basement area, there's a little laundry room off to your right-hand side of the stairs. And then I looked to the left, and there was this large game room. And the game room had a pool table and family things,
sure,
where a family would enjoy themselves.
Sure.
In front of you, there was a little door, and it was into a small, like a cold cellar. You know, the old houses that had like a little root cellar.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So you open the door, you go into a root cellar. I never could really go into that room because it had an odor to it. Now, you have to understand that I was under the impression that the house had nothing there. But I investigated the house to see, as I walked by, to see what possibly could have affected it to cause people to be affected by the house. And so we got to the laundry room, had some clothes that were on the floor. So I mixed it clean by nature, and I picked up the clothes and threw them in and washed them, and figuring maybe if there was an odor there, it might be the clothing themselves. So, because it was definitely like a dirty sock smell or something that had soiled.
A foul odor.
Yeah, like just an odor. And I'm one of these people that is very fussy and very clean. And if there's a smell, I'll either find the source. And as a psychic, if you say a refrigerator's in the air, I better be able to put my hand under it. Or otherwise, I'm not going to believe that there's a refrigerator in the air. You know, you have to use logic.
Well, I know that sock smell. My mom told me my socks could march the way to the washer by themselves. When I was about 13 years old, it was awful.
Well, I'll tell you, the lessons were impeccably clean, and the house was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, what they lost, they'll never be able to replace. That was for sure afterwards when we sit down. And the reality is that there has to be something thrown away because there was more truth in that house as you got to know it.
Well, I know the finances of all this, and the people who say this is some kind of farce or hoax are full of it because the money thing doesn't add up in any way you look at it, either before, during, or after. None of it makes any sense unless.
Because that house had his possessions alone. When you walked in, you knew you would walk out. I thought they were very affluent because they had collections of coins and things. You know, he was a collector, obviously. But that's a moot point right now.
What is important, though, and what I want to get from you is what you sense finally in that house.
Okay. When you go up the stairs, from the first stair to the seventh stair, there's a hot and bad feeling, a feeling of wrapping. And it's as though that something terrible had happened on that stairwell. And that was the first sense of something not quite right. Going up the stairs to the sewing room, I walked in and I've been blessed with an imagination or a mind that can see time. And there was a young woman in there, I'd say 15 or 16, with long brown hair and parted in the middle. And if you remember those little dresses that had the paisley things,
Yes.
And she was crying. And one of our jobs, one of my jobs is, if you see something that's misplaced, you try to place it back. So I started to say some prayers and said, go to the white light, because I knew that then I thought that was what the formula was. Um, and so I said, go to the white light, and at that point in time, it was as though the house did not want that soul released, and you started to feel pressures and anger. And then when you walk out to the hallway, I felt that I had given her the white light and she had gone, in my mind.
But there was evil, real evil in that house.
Absolutely. Absolutely. After the investigation, there was, I could never go to the third floor. When you walk down the hall on the right-hand side, there's a stairwell. Well, I'm not allowed sometimes to do things because I'm one of these people that still believe in B&B and the tooth fairy and things like that. And so I'm not good with evil or bad things.
I don't think many of us have confronted pure evil directly. Father Malachi Martin has spoken many times, and I still, even the concept of evil as an entity, as a pure thing, will stand there on the back of my neck straight up, and I have a sense, but that's all. I've never confronted it directly, nor do I wish to.
Well, neither had I. And I had a group of friends. I worked at the Diaspora in Bridgeport at that time, and I had a school, and I had 4 priest friends, and whenever I went anywhere, they always gave me holy water and part of their Bibles, cross, and brought it with me, just as a kind of a protection for myself. Because you never know, if you don't, people don't understand that if there's good, there's evil.
I understand.
You just don't touch it as frequently. And because we're locked in a clock time, we don't walk the perimeters.
Yes.
The one thing that I did know about that house was it was not the original house. There used to be an artist. And I can, in my mind, blueprints will form. And I kind of sense when something's real or not real. And the thing that I knew immediately, without having met me, was that this was a man that was protecting his children and his home. It had nothing. I don't even think he believed in us as psychic investigators. I mean, not truly. I think his main concern was the amount of money that he invested in the home.
Of course.
And his children.
Yeah, that's the real world. But bottom line, Mary, in your investigation, there was no question in your mind you had encountered in that house Jerry.
We had a Channel 5 that was doing a seance, and I was to be released psychic in that. We had gotten to the point where the house had began to affect me. And I had gotten up the stairs and I called down to Ed and I said, Ed, I'm as sick as a dog. Well, I had this little room upstairs. I believe it was Mrs. bedroom. And that was my haven. I could go there and feel perfectly safe. Perfectly safe. So I said, Ed, I'm going to lay down in the bed for a little while. Because it was either that I hadn't slept or whatever. And so I began to say my prayers, and I was saying, Our Father. And as I was saying, Our Father, I looked out at the door, and there was a young man that was with me, taping. And I looked out at the door, and as I was saying, Our Father, there was a group of figures standing outside of the door saying, Our Father, backward. I thought, excuse me, that doesn't sit well with me. I'm also a stubborn person that says, don't threaten me because I'll stand up and my fists go up. And
Mary, is there any question in your mind that the DeFeo souls were trapped in that home?
I didn't know about the DeFeos at the time, but I did know. Yeah, I did know that in one of the bedrooms, I sensed the young man who was crying as though he had done something really bad. So I knew two things about this house. I knew, one, that someone was forced into a position to commit something really horrible there. Didn't know what it was, but did know that it happened. That there was a force, an energy in that house that was subject to taking hold of somebody. And I will say this now, and I'll say it to the day I die, that since we don't know what time is, and time in time is only a fraction of a second, that the energy in that house remains. It may take 100 years of my time, but it will implode again. And that house is purely evil. I took the holy water and threw it outside to the figures. I took the cross and I raised the cross and I said a prayer and I said, God is with me. And I threw it and I, did you ever throw water on a fire? And you get this kind of a little hissing sound?
Yes.
Well, that's what the sound was. The kid that was with me. I thought he was going to faint. But again, that's the house that it will take an innocent person, and I believe Kathy was such a sweet and innocent child, a girl, young woman, and it affected house. It affected curious children. And Lee was the strength in that house, so the house could never really affect him, only make him angry and want to find out what was the matter.
You're very well aware the investigators, Mary, caught a photograph when there was no child in the home. An eerie photograph that'll stand the hair on the back of your neck straight up at the top of that stairwell. Caught a photograph of the child when there was no photograph no child in there to be photographed. They got a photograph of what appears to be a ghost child. I've got that on the website right now, www.arco.com. Is there any question in your mind that photograph is one of the Lutz? Excuse me, not the Lutz, the DeFeo.
God forbid.
Yeah, God forbid, right. The DeFeo children?
I believe that since I was not allowed up on the third floor to where the children were, the boys actually were, that it was probably one of those. And do I believe they were trapped? Yes, I do. I think the girl escaped into what may have been another room of haven, and that what Father felt was a presence without being able to be aware that there was a presence there. And, you know, us Catholics are trained in a very different way.
And Mary, you believe that house is going to, as you put it, implode again?
Absolutely. You get somebody that's very susceptible.
Mary, we're out of the thing you walk time, and I've got to go, but I want to thank you for calling in, and thank you so much.
Okay, and I'm on and listening.
All right, Mary. Mary Pasquarella, George Lutz is my guest. She walks time. That was some stroll she took in that house. I'm Art Bell. George, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Art.
You have described what happened in that house at Amityville, George, as, I don't know, I guess kind of a three-ring circus. Now, many in my audience have either read the book or seen the movie, and the movie, of course, dramatized the heck out of what happened, I suppose.
That's a really nice way to put that.
Is it?
It was very Hollywood.
Very Hollywood. All right, but what's the real story, George? What really did happen there?
It didn't happen all at once. When I think back on it now, I think my perceptions of it are different than they were then. It seemed at times then that it just was like a rolling snowball that got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, no family pays that kind of money for a house, lays their life on the line, especially a place they love, and then flees a house, George. It doesn't happen without some really serious stuff going on. Movie or no movie, nobody does that. Nobody flees a house without a significant reason. What really happened?
When we left the house, Art, I should tell you that we wanted to get the house fixed. Really did not want to just leave our stuff or give up on living there.
Of course not.
And so when the opportunity came to put together the psychics that went in and investigate the house, the idea was that they would fix it.
Yeah, but there was obviously a lot wrong to fix, and that's what I want to know about. I mean, what the hell happened in that house to even bring the psychics on? What did
they believe, in other words?
Well, or even to the point where the psychics came in. I mean, what began to happen in that house, George?
By the last week we were there, it was nightly occurrences of noises, things like odors coming and going, or Kathy being touched from behind by some unseen person, or Missy talking to herself and asking questions like Jody telling us about her imaginary friend that wasn't so imaginary, it turns out.
Yeah, she claimed to have an imaginary friend, right?
Yes, and she would come and ask Kathy questions like, do angels talk? And Jody is the name of the angel, and Jody is telling Missy that we're going to live there forever. Strange thing. Kind of off-putting. Our dog Harry would not go in that room that Mary was talking about earlier. The last night we were in the house was the reason not to stay there anymore. And when we called Father Ray the next day, he asked what we were still doing there. He was surprised that we were still even in the house, and it hadn't even occurred to us that even at that point, to just not going to abandon everything and get in the van and leave. That night, Kathy had levitated and moved away from me on the bed.
No, wait a minute. Slow up right there. Sure. Kathy levitated.
Yes.
Now, you were both in bed?
Yes.
And you were both awake or both asleep, or at the time, or what?
Kathy was asleep.
She was asleep.
And she lifted up off the bed and went towards the wall away from me. This is after she had turned into an old crone, a really ugly old woman that literally took hours and hours for it to go away.
In front of your face?
Yes. And then later she did that again at her mom's house after we moved out of the house and moved in with her mom.
Oh my God! You're sitting there watching your wife, and she turns and, like the picture of Dorian Gray, she almost instantly becomes an old woman.
Yes.
And then that effect remains for hours.
And yeah, one time it was longer than just a few hours. What happened, Art, was that these things in by themselves. For example, everyone in that house, all my kids and Kathy, slept on their stomachs in that house. After we moved out, we found out that the DeFeo murders, the whole family had slept on their stomachs. They were all murdered in their sleep. None of them got up. None of them got out of bed or were awakened, evidently, by the sounds of the rifle going off, killing all 6 of them. There were no drugs found in their bodies in the autopsy. And they were all sleeping face down. I was the only one that could not sleep face down in that house. I never slept face down before that, and I simply couldn't do it there.
Through all of this, George, did you ever question your own sanity? I mean, we don't often look at our wives and see them become a 90-year-old woman instantly and then have that remain for hours. I mean, we just don't. Did you question your own sanity?
Sure. Many, many times in many different ways.
What about the effect on Kathy? Kathy, was she questioning your sanity or her own, or were you beginning to understand it was the house?
Kathy was damaged in a different. Each of us were affected in a different way, and I think Kathy was damaged in a different way than I was, and I think that for her, in so many ways, it was much harder for her to recover over the years and be able to put it in a place, so to speak, give it some distance. Even after moving to California and then later on to Arizona, there were times when she was much more sensitive than I was.
Do you think she's all right with it now? Has she come to terms now with it, or is it still bad word haunting her?
When we did a special for the History Channel 2 years ago, and that interview was some 8 hours, and she was hooked up to has a disorder a breathing disorder called valley fever that is quite serious, quite debilitating, and right now she's still in a form of a hospital that deals with respiratory diseases.
Yeah, I saw the oxygen tubes.
Yeah, she's had a relapse since then. That was a very hard day for her. The interview was, I think, something like 8.5 hours. And then afterwards, we went out to dinner. So it was a long day for her. And there are times when, certain questions will come up, be worded in a certain way that are really, you can see the effect on her, sure. But that happens to me as well. It's not a comfortable subject. It's not something, that has a lot of humor in it.
Yeah.
And humor is the one thing that does make it less strong, less affecting of you.
Yes, I understand that. I use it myself.
It's a wonderful tool to deal with this kind of thing.
The movie, of course, dramatized the ooze out of the walls and the flies and all the rest of that.
The flies were real.
The flies, tell me about that.
The flies were, this was the winter time, and the back bedroom, that one sewing room, had flies from the day we moved in, and they became more and more and more. And they were there when the investigators went in. Just on the back window. And that's the same window that Mary saw I guess you'd call it an apparition or a person from looking up at it. Flies were always there. They were always go away. You'd kill them and they'd still come back.
Really? So that part was real?
Not the oozing out of the walls.
Not the oozing out of the walls.
That was it's one of those things that fact is sometimes in my mind is stranger than fiction. It really happened that I think they tried to draw that from. What really happened in the house was that there were keyholes, old style doors. The house was built in the 30s and it had old style keyholes.
I remember this.
We had drips that got longer and longer. They were black. They were almost like an epoxy. And the longer we were in the house, the longer the drips came out of certain keyholes on the second and third floor.
Oh, so there was some basis in truth.
Yes, but not the oozing out of the walls.
Not the oozing, but something.
And then we would wake up in the morning and we would find this gelatin-like substance going from room to room. And you would think, well, the kids got into jello or somebody did something. But there was no jello in the house at the time, and the kids didn't do that. And it was sticky, and it was there. It was there for the...
So what did you do with this stuff? Just try and clean it up, or what?
It was like spots. It wasn't like a big mess of some kind. It trapped from room to room. And Kathy would wipe it up.
And just move on. So that was occurring every day?
No, you couldn't depend on anything. The one thing, thank God, is the lights didn't go out. At no time did they would flicker, but they did not go out.
They would flicker it up. Yes. So I guess I see what you mean by a three-ring circus. All of this kind of thing was going on.
Well, I'm sorry, I strayed from where I was going before. One of the things was that I would be laying there in bed on my back, and everyone else would be asleep, and I would be quiet, and I'd be getting ready to go to sleep, and I would hear, or I would be already asleep, and I would wake up to a sound of musicians like tuning out downstairs.
Really?
And I would think that a clock radio went off and it was off the station or something like that. And there was no clock radio down there, but that's the first thing that comes to you. No one else would go down there. And there'd be no noise, and the dog would be asleep right by the front door. Harry was a big black Malamute. He wasn't a shirking little princess. He was a really cool dog. He was in love with those kids. He was gotten as a tiny puppy.
I don't know whether you've ever been asked this, George, but it's a logical question. In view of the DeFeo slaughter, was there ever a time when you found your mind drifting to an awful place where you were perhaps being urged to or considered doing evil yourself, George?
Not a question I've ever answered in public.
Really?
I don't know that I'll answer you this straight out, okay, but what I will say is this. The tool we mentioned of humor,
Yes.
I told Father Ray many of the things that went on for us, and he was the one that told me about humor, that evil can't stand it, it can't be in the presence of it, it has no understanding of humor, it can't relate to it, and it drives it away. And I had to learn the mental ability to be able to think of something humorous when I would get a thought that I didn't like.
So you did answer it. You did get it. And that's how you respond.
It's the only thing that's ever worked other than the rosary.
A kind of a defense. Humor is a defense. There's no question about it. I mean, you're right about that. It is. And so you were strong enough to muster that up as a defense.
Well, it became an exercise, but it took years to get for it to be just an exercise and not something that was a real struggle.
I understand that you actually began to have some feelings of sorrow or caring about DeFeo's, going to be in jail for 6 life sentences. And the only reason that I can understand that you would begin to get those feelings is because you would understand perhaps a little bit of what he went through. And that's why I asked you the question, George.
There's no doubt in our minds, never has been any doubt after living there, that the same person doesn't do this to his family. And someone with any kind of right thinking or ability to reason, that reason has been taken away or has been obfuscated in such a way, occluded or clouded, or they've been separated from their reasoning powers in a way that most of us hopefully will never understand. And there's no doubt in our mind that he was influenced by that house and that he was controlled, at least for a point. He provided a service to that, if you will, that so horrible that he couldn't live with it or realize it himself, and without extreme long-term psychiatric care, he had no help of redemption of any kind in his life.
Do you think that in his case should be reviewed for the reasons you're talking about right now?
I don't know I don't know that matters.
It probably doesn't, but it's an important question.
He had his appeals that failed. I think that a disservice was done to him terribly years ago, that it wasn't a full-blown insanity plea, that it wasn't appealed on that basis, that it wasn't an absolute, that he needed psychiatric care and still does. I think it's inhumane to think that, okay, they got the guy, he did it. Yes, physically he did the murders, but spiritually, emotionally, no, I don't believe that he's, in a pure sense, responsible for that as a human being. I think that he needs help, and I don't think that anyone cares enough to try to get it for him anymore. We did what we could, and we tried a number of different ways, and his attorney, William Weber, wanted to do a book and make money off him, and signed his farm sale up for a 5% cut of whatever book that his lawyer did, put together. So it became obvious that these people were not going to try to help him.
The final night that you spent in that house, you've never talked about. You've always refused to talk about the last night in the house. Why?
What happens, Art, is when you do that, the worst of it comes back. It's not like it disappeared. It's not like I can detach myself from it and just talk about it like what I did yesterday. You feel it. Not all of it, thank God, but it comes back and it's not a pleasant experience. I was laying there in bed. Kathy meditated. I had to grab her to keep her from going off the bed.
There is no question in your mind, George. You weren't dreaming this. You weren't asleep. I mean, it's an obvious question. Yeah.
No, there's no question. We were so very pleased 3 years later to have Chris Gugas come along and give us a hologram test, each of them, in his office with Michael Wright.
I was not aware that had been done.
Yeah, and one of the questions, well, a long process. It's not like you walk in, strap on the machine, and go.
Oh, yeah.
You have to agree to the questions. They have to run a baseline. They do a physiological workup to get within that baseline so that they can get the real responses.
Yes.
Chris Dugas has taught the use of the polygraph. He was considered number 2 and number 3 man in the world at the time. He taught the use of the polygraph throughout the world for the armed forces, for the Army, for their intelligence people. He had been instructed personally by the head guy at the FBI.
So that was one of the questions he asked.
One of the questions was, did you left it? One of the questions was, did Kathy turn out to an old woman?
And you answered them all and went sailing past.
Absolutely. Later, those findings were published in the National Star of all things. It was one of those things where the movie company was ready to release the movie, and they wanted to do this, and these are expensive tests.
Oh, I'm well aware.
They were willing to pay for it, and we said, get us the best there is, and we'll do it. Otherwise, we're not interested in doing it with someone that just got out of school. You get 5 questions. They have to be yes or no. And that, you get one shot at doing this thing right. It's not like you have...
Well, George, people who are lying usually don't agree to a polygraph. George, when you saw Kathy become a 90-year-old woman, or that is suddenly, I can't even imagine what would have gone through your mind. I mean, it would have been like, out of this house now. Gone. I'm out of here. Running out of here, actually. But to see that happen to your wife, apparently more than once? Yeah, more than once. I mean, what went through your mind? Aside from questioning your own sanity, once you realized this really was going on, what did you think was happening?
What occurs to me to answer you right now is thinking, how do we fix this? Not putting it together with the house as such.
Did you think you were seeing your wife as an old woman, or did you think you were seeing something else?
I had watched the transformation, so I knew it was her. I wasn't going all kinds of other places, I don't think, in my mind. It's so long ago now, Art, for me to try to tell you exactly what I was thinking then. I couldn't do it. It wouldn't be right. I'd be making something up that wouldn't
don't do that.
What went through my mind then. I know the main thing was how do we fix this? Of course, that's the obvious stuff.
All right, well, obviously, it's
the revulsion that I remember feeling also. I mean, this is not pleasant.
Yeah, of course not. And it seems somebody levitated in the air.
But I don't know that you put it to the house.
Well, I can understand. I mean, you love that house. You were trying, I'm sure, in your own mind, to think of anything else other than the house.
Absolutely. When the odors occurred in the basement, you go looking for broken pipes or leaks.
Absolutely.
When you have noises, you go try to look for the cause of them. You would be sitting in the kitchen at night, and the kids would be asleep, and you'd hear someone upstairs walking around. So you'd go up, and you'd find all the kids asleep in the bed. So you'd come back down, and a couple nights later, you'd have some people over, and they would hear the same thing. And you would know you weren't crazy, and then you would know that something's going on that you don't really understand. It doesn't mean you just get up and leave your house. Aside
from having a priest in, you and Kathy tried to bust the house on your own, right?
Yes, we did, twice.
What happened?
We were told it didn't work. We heard this chorus of voices, as described, asking us to stop busting the house. We went around and opened the window in each room. A friend of ours, and what I said earlier, that you have people over and they hear the same thing. Well, in the process of that, a fellow by the name of Bill Newcomb had come over, and excuse me for just a moment, I said, well,
I understand. Doing it non-stop here for days.
Yeah. And he had a similar problem in his house. In a house that evidently was haunted. And he said, you go around, you bless, do the house blessing yourself. You go around, you open a window in each room, you say the Lord's Prayer, tell whatever's there to leave, and then you close the window. Well, that seemed like a reasonable solution, especially since here was someone that had worked before. And he had heard the footsteps, and he knew the kids were asleep. So we did that. My son Danny's hands were caught in the window in a sewing room, and they were flattened. His hands were down, and the window had flattened the hands, and the reaction was we got to go to the hospital, and we started to go get ready to go.
And what happened? This window of its paranoid accord came slamming down on his hands?
Yeah. And didn't just slam down, was mushed in such a way that his hands were actually deformed. They were flat.
Huh.
So we get ready to go to the hospital, and then and he's screaming. And everybody's running around getting their coats and getting him downstairs and trying to calm him down. It was pretty much impossible. You go to leave and look at his hands and he's fine.
What?
It didn't occur to us until much later that the house never really wanted us to leave. We would always invite people over. We would have, but we would go out of our way not to leave, not to go out someplace. While we were there, we had enrolled in a reupholstery course at the local high school.
Flip these phones, do you, folks?
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
And we never went to any of the classes. I mean, Kathy went out and bought the materials to recover the dining room set that we had bought from the DeFeo estate. But we never.
That's right.
Just don't go out.
Yeah, that's a curious thing. You did buy a number of things from the DeFeo estate from the house, right? Why did you do that? Because it was a really good buy, or what was the reason?
Well, look, let's start with we had two houses. Not both of us liked each other's furniture. We had garage sales at Kathy's house. We had garage sales at my house.
Right.
Now we're moving into a 4,000 square foot house, and we've got to fill it up if we can with some stuff. They made us a deal we kind of couldn't sort of refuse.
Yeah, gotcha.
And they had nice stuff. It wasn't like this was blood splattered or anything. It was,
good stuff.
Yeah. Dining room set was extraordinary. The kitchen set was lovely. Some of the dressers that were up in Mitzi's room were fine. There was no reason not to buy all of that. It was there.
Yeah, and really, if you're buying the house and you're walking into that, you know what happened, then what's the difference between that and whatever?
Well, the mattresses weren't there, nothing like that. I mean, we had our own bed. It was one of those things that was decided at the closing. What happened at the closing was that they had, the people that ran the estate had filled up the oil tank, which was almost another $2,000 in cash that was needed right down in there too. So the actual cash out of pocket at the closing, including the furniture and everything, was about $24,000. On the last night that we were in there, I wasn't able to get up out of bed. There was a storm going on as far as we were concerned as a family in the house while we were awake.
A storm in the house?
No, while we were in the house, there was a storm going on right around outside.
Okay.
Big storm. Later it was said that there was no storm there. Well, we know what we experienced. As far as we're concerned, there was an incredible storm that night. The boys' heads were being lifted up and slammed down overhead of me, but I could not get up out of bed to go up and deal with that or stop it or see what was going on.
What about Kathy?
That's when Kathy was levitating and moving away from me and turning into an old woman. Kathy was mostly asleep that night. Well, I brought Harry, our dog, up and tied him to the master bedroom doorknob for him to stay there right there. And he kept getting up, walking in circles, throwing up, and then he went back to sleep again.
When you say you couldn't get up, you say you didn't sleep on your stomach, right?
I could not get up out of bed.
You literally couldn't move.
No, I could not.
And this went on all night long?
This went on most of the night. I was soaking wet. And it was from sweat.
Prior to this night, had you been talking to Kathy at all privately? I would assume you would have conversations with Kathy about what was going on aside from the children.
Yes, and she would tell me what Missy would say to her. The boys were were treating each other differently than they had before we moved in there. Everyone kind of went to their own spaces at times. For each of us, we learned later it was a different experience at times in the house. It wasn't like we all experienced everything in unison or saw the same things or heard the same things.
Well, that's the next question I was going to ask. Do you have any knowledge, George? I asked you about your own state of mind and whether you were perhaps being pushed to do something awful or felt moments of that. I wonder if since you found out that anybody else in the family was being pushed in one way or the other.
You'll need to ask me that again a different way if you would. Sorry, I don't want to answer this in a way that I am assuming what you're asking me.
Yeah. Are you now aware that anybody else in your family was being affected in a particularly negative way, perhaps to the degree that they might have done something awful? And if you don't want to answer that,
no, I'm not aware of that. No, that's not. Boys were little.
Unfortunately, in America, we live in a time where little boys have done some pretty awful things.